NIRO knowledge. One off.
Hello, everybody in the world. Welcome to another episode of NIRO Knowledge. I am your host, Nick Roy. Nicholas for some of those, whichever one, I don't really care. Nick or Nicholas works, right? Anyway, let's jump into this. So last week I talked about ECAC and the conference that I saw for that. Lots of great guests mentioned those names. They were tagged in the last week's podcast, so you can definitely take a look at that, run their names, take a peek at what they have to offer you as I continue to reach out and try to get some of these people on the program as well. One of the other notes, again, I have coming up is Dr. Suzanne Knabe-Nickel, and as I struggle with my recording here and trying to move things around a little bit so that way I can read my notes for you, she is coming up, so she will be on next week for everybody, so we can have a conversation with that. She has a conference coming out. It is free, the Rapid Fire Conference, so feel free to next week when I put that link in the notes, and I'm pretty sure I'll do it again this week anyway. Take a look at her page. She is the police science doctor. Give her a quick look. Use again the link in the show notes. Kick you on over that way. Sign up for that free conference. She's got a lot of great guests coming on, and myself will be there speaking with you as well. One of the 10-minute presentations for that conference. That will be in April, but again, jump on that, jump in, get registered, get yourself ready for some great bits of information from lots of different topics, sexual assaults to domestic violence, as well as how to use, do crime linking, as they call it that way, but social networking in a sense as well, and a few other topics that are in there. With that, I was thinking to myself the other day what to do for this episode, and there's a bunch of different things, right? There's a lot of analytical work and processes that we can chat about, put together, and put forward. But I kind of wanted to go back through and really get to the history of policing, right? Where it kind of all started. And the reason for doing that is because a lot of the conversations that have come up about, how police really aren't doing what the public perceives as great work, right? Necessarily, and kind of seemingly how we've strayed. When we talk about this, you'll see how we, in the realm of policing, have strayed from really these principles that I'm going to talk about, and have gone away from community and made it somehow this us versus them mentality. And I think we perceive it as the same way on the other side of the coin, right? Where everybody in the public who is not an officer, they don't understand, and it's an us versus them mentality on their side as well. So it's a very interesting thing as I was reading through these once again, and several times over, more recently, because I think it really speaks to what it is we need to get back to, because these principles are pretty well laid out, and they're coming on 200 years old. I have 8 more years and they will be 200 years old. And for some of you who probably already know well enough the history, Sir Robert Peel and his policing principles and his core ideas that he came up with in 1829. And I'm pulling this material right from a law enforcement action partnership.org. So thank you, people, for hosting this site and having this great bits of information on Sir Robert Peel's principles and his core ideas. Because this is something I think that we need to leverage and understand, I should say. We need to understand this as we move forward with what it is, our why, right? So as analysts, we may not be technically policing and involved directly into some of these principles, but the core ideas are something that in principles are something we can strive to help and correct and get back on track. And it's how are we going to do that as analysts? Sometimes the industry itself, especially here in the US, is not something that has taken off very well across the country. And while there might be some larger metropolitan areas that implement analysis, what are they doing effectively to use them? Or are they just bean counters at that point to say, this is how many we have and we're up and down and that's it? So how do we as analysts kind of drive towards some of these principles and core ideas and get that across? So I'm going to go through these core ideas here and just kind of give the quick breakdown. And as I have this conversation, feel free to think about this on your own too, with what you're performing in your duties currently. What could you yourself be performing? And I've started to take that view as well in my several positions that I hold, and trying to figure out what is it that I can do to help kind of put these on track and back into the world of policing here in America. And try to be that driving force to get the change implemented at this point. So one of the core ideas listed here: the goal is preventing crime, not catching criminals. If the police stop crime before it happens, we don't have to punish citizens or suppress their rights. An effective police department doesn't have high arrest stats. Its community has low crime rates. And this speaks volumes to exactly what crime analysis can help with. At this point, that is a number, just going back to the podcast with Dr. Cynthia Lum, even in her research on reinventing American policing. This speaks volumes to where what we have instituted in policing is probably a very improper manner in which to show work, right? And that was to push that aspect of writing tickets and arresting people. And that was the number that showed that the police are doing their job, when technically really what should be done to show that police are doing their job is the reduced crime, as it says here. But I think along with that, that really shows reduced victimization. And really, that's the goal. If we are going to serve and protect, should it not be in order to reduce victimization at that point? Shouldn't we be educating some of the more, per se, vulnerable populations that are out there of these scams that are going around, so that way they're not victimized by it? There's a level of knowledge that gets missed by people who are older. They don't understand computers, they don't understand phones. And I will take full responsibility on that as well, because I know in about 30-40 years, whatever new technologies are out, I'm not going to know how to use it. And the people who do may leverage it to create me as a victim and empty my bank account. It's a tale as old as time, right? But it's always the case, and it's something that we just have to do. We have to help and educate that field. And it's not something, where is it? Where's the school for it? Where's the online course? And, there's another problem there. My grandparents didn't really play online or use the internet necessarily. I don't get emails from my grandmother. So, well, kudos to you if you are one that uses it, that, and more power to you. But I completely understand that they don't. So how do we as analysts help drive that change? How do we get it so that way our community has low crime rates? It's by being analysts, right? Coming up with the strategies, finding these problem areas, things that we have proven to be successful in terms of finding hotspots and figuring out certain strategies, maybe changing the geographic environment, right? Some of the things I've talked about before, analytical or an analyst that went to basically a big retail box store, was out looking at it visually and said, yeah, I know exactly what you could do in order to reduce some of your crime. And it was just to change. They had no fencing basically. And so people were beating feet, robbing the place. Well, not robbing them. They were shoplifting and then cutting loose. Raise the fence, raise the hedges. Guess what? There was an immediate reduction from there. And that lowers your crime rate. You're lowering your victimization. You're lowering a lot of things. I mean, probably even costs at that point across the board, because somebody's not losing product, then charging somebody else. And we know how it goes on from there. So there's, from that one core alone, how analysts can help get this drive to a better spot. We don't have to make all of these arrests, but what can we do to curtail the victimization before it really happens? Because for a lot of this, we probably could. All right, so the second one. The key to preventing crime is earning public support. Every community member must share the responsibility of preventing crime as if they were all volunteer members of the force. They will only accept this responsibility if the community supports and trusts the police. Obviously, we have a big problem with that at this point. A lot of people do not support and trust the police at this time. And how do we get back into, per se, good graces? Some of it might be having them understand that first core, right? Understand that we're not out to get them, but we're out to help and protect them. And again, in order to do that, it's not to hit them with a ticket and arrests, but to attempt to create less victimization, lower that crime rate at that point. With that, I think you have full support, because nobody's going to say, well, we shouldn't have less victims, right? It's something that we should all strive for. And, see something, say something is one of those pieces. You may be somebody of the public who gives the phone call to the police department. And at that point, that could be the missing piece of the puzzle that ties the whole thing together and does apprehend the suspect, or pieces the whole timeline together for the officers and analysts to figure out, hey, you know what, got it now. I know this pattern. I can figure this out. This is the problem. And now we know how to strategize to work and suppress it, to knock it down, to bring that lowered, to bring that crime rate down to a lower standard. So it takes all of us. It's not an us versus them. It's purely just an us, right? So to break that down, that's going to be obviously a little more difficult for analysts, but we're all human. We all have to live in this world. We all have to work together to achieve the goals that we want. But what is that goal, right? And that goal goes back personally to that core, that first one that we just talked about. So a third core value here, and the final one, is the police earn public support by respecting community principles. Winning public approval requires hard work to build reputation. Enforcing the laws impartially, hiring officers who represent and understand the community, and using force only as a last resort. And I think for the most part, that's really the tenet that we all try to go by anyway. But obviously there's some skewing that takes place, some fear and media and all of these kind of force multipliers that create a misconception, a misunderstanding. Shows like CSI and Criminal Minds, sometimes people believe that that's really what's taking place and how a process works. And as we know, unfortunately, that's not the case. We don't have, the vast majority of us, I should say, do not have a criminal lab built into our police department where we can have a 5-second turnaround time for those DNA results, for the fingerprints to come back, right, to somebody. And that takes somebody actually being in the system to begin with, which, believe it or not, is not the case. So some of these things take time. Some of our states only have a state lab. And so one place is designated for well over 200, 300, 400, how many cities are in your state that get dumped into that one laboratory for them to run everybody's criminal cases and their evidence and their blood and their DWI cases and their fingerprints. And you get the idea. You've seen CSI, you know how much stuff they test, right? So again, as I say, that's not a proper standard, but you've seen the different things that kind of come to fruition and through cases to a degree, but obviously you have one spot with 300 places, and now take a guess at how many different pieces of evidence for how many different cases now get run to that state laboratory. So I think that's really a good start for where analysts need to be and where we need to be working in order to kind of drive these core ideas to be a better suited and be more upfront in the public side. I know us as analysts usually want to be um, to go back to a Marvel movie of Spider-Man Far From Home, the first one, right? What his buddy wants to do, he wants to be the guy in the chair, right? He wants to be that guy, the guy kind of behind the scenes. Alfred's another great example for any of the Batman fans out there, but it's we want to kind of be hidden, just that computer warrior to a degree, and find that information, send it off, and the job gets done that way, right? Like quick success behind the scenes from all the digging we've done, and one little piece of information is what generates that big action that takes place that closes down, a big drug ring or something. But obviously, that's not always the case. So really, what is our goal? I think we should revert in some form back to these core ideas, at least really take a look at them and see how they're going to affect policing in the future, because these past ones are really are just perfectly phrased in a sense to get us moving forward. Nobody's excluded from it, and it's not an us versus them, it's an us that gets worked with in the policing principles of Sir Robert Peel, again, almost 200 years ago. So it's kind of silly to see something that was made so long ago continue to really be so relevant, but somehow not even be used for the most part. And I'm not saying people aren't using them. Don't get me wrong, there are some great agencies and thinkers and leaders out there who have this or want this in, or have streamlined it in some way and put it into their practice. But it's obviously not the well received and the basically the well received and well utilized principles at this point for police agencies, seemingly. There's no study on that. I don't have data for you, unfortunately. But obviously, from what we have currently that we're working towards correcting in the law enforcement policing field, if this was in place, I do not feel that this would be a problem at this point. So just kind of really cook through these other ones that you guys can read anyway, but I will go through them. It is again, Sir Robert Peel's policing principles, his 9 policing principles from almost 200 years ago. I will give you the link to this. Excuse me. It is on the website lawenforcementactionpartnership.org. And I'll give you the rest because there's a nice little piece about Peel policing principles at the end of that. But number 1, to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to their repression by military force and severity of legal punishment. Number 2, recognize always that the power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties is dependent on public approval of their existence, actions, and behavior, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. Kind of, if you're watching this, I'm making faces at this point. I mean, if you're listening to this, yeah, if you're watching it, you're seeing the face. If you're listening to this, I am making faces at this point because of that last piece alone. On their ability to secure and maintain public respect, right? 3, to recognize always that to secure and maintain the respect and approval of the public means also the securing of the willing cooperation of the public in the task of securing observance of laws. All right. 4, to recognize always that the extent to which the cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionately the necessity of the use of physical force and compulsion for achieving police objectives. Number 5, to seek and preserve public favor, not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating absolute impartial service to law, in complete independence of policy, and without regard to the justice or injustice of the substance of individual laws, by ready offering of individual services and friendship to all members of the public without regard to their wealth or social standing, by ready exercise of courtesy and friendly good humor, and by ready offering of individual sacrifice in protecting and preserving life. Still making faces for those people listening. 6, to use physical force only when the exercise of persuasion, advice, and warning is found to be insufficient to obtain public cooperation to an extent necessary to secure observance of law or to restore order, and to use only the minimum degree of physical force which is necessary on any particular occasion for achieving a police objective. To maintain at all times number 7, sorry. To maintain at all times a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and that the public are the police. The police being only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interests of community welfare and existence. 8, to recognize always the need for strict adherence to police executive functions and to refrain from even seeming to usurp the powers of the judiciary of avenging individuals or the state, and of authoritatively judging guilt and punishing the guilty. And number 9, the last one here, to recognize always the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. Number 9 is the hugest one for us analysts. I mean, everything else that's in there, we can work with and get together. And I think we understand to a great degree. And some of those, as some of you were watching could see, you probably should read those a couple times because obviously the English there is a little hinky for us and not succinct exactly. But really, number 9, to recognize always that the test of police efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder and not the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. Huge, huge, huge. Because again, to go back to the core values, and even as I was reading through this again, it reminded me of Dr. Cynthia Lum and Reinventing American Policing. And this conversation right here is really this last one. And for us as analysts to engage with academia and get to some of those strategies that are involved in reducing crime and disorder is really what we need to be working towards, because what police have been doing is what, right? The visible evidence of police action. We have continued to hammer, arrest, write summons, and basically perform police action, as opposed to in the hopes, I guess, of creating a reduction in crime and disorder. I don't know anywhere that extreme punishment constantly works, because you just end up agitating people for an extended period of time. But for those who believe in police action, it is not to say that there aren't merits to enforcement. However, honey and vinegar, right, is really how this plays out. And I think research has really done a great job of kind of showing that the guardian aspect of policing, exactly what these 9 principles are, exactly what those core values are, is really where we create the most effect. And so I'll leave it to you folks to kind of mull over. But really, how do we get to that point of reduction and not to the point of police action proof that we're really doing our job effectively? So how are we as analysts, how are we going to work in cooperation with our agency, with the public, academia, all other stakeholders for our communities, to make sure that we address number 9 and have that police efficiency with the absence of crime and disorder, as opposed to the visible evidence of police action in dealing with them. All right. And so I'll leave you with that little thought. If you stuck with me through all these, kudos to you. Again, I will give you those links to it, but think on that a little bit. Hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn. Let me know what you think of these tenets, these principles laid out by Sir Robert Peel almost 200 years ago, and really what it means in today's society and culture of policing, and in today's society and culture, and how you think that works, doesn't work. It's all good to disagree, because that's what makes life go round. And we're all human. We all have our own perspectives and opinions. Let me know what you think. Put those in the comments. Tag me in it. Put it in the stream. Whatever you need to do. But let's have a conversation about that. And I bid you guys all a great day. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Thank you. Another great episode of NIRO Knowledge. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and remember to share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite service. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at nick@niroca.com. It is nick@niroca.com.